The locked door was always there. From the very first afternoon Kathleen had walked through Warren's house 3 months before the wedding, when he'd given her a key and said with quiet formality, "This is your home now, whenever you want it to be." She had noticed the door at the end of the second-floor hallway. Dark oak, brass hardware that didn't match anything else in the house. A keyhole of a different shape entirely, as though it had been installed years after everything else, as an afterthought, or a deliberate choice. She had asked only once, standing in the hallway with a glass of sweet tea, looking at the door the way you look at something that bothers you without being able to say exactly why. "What's in there?" Warren had glanced at it, just for a moment, barely a flicker, and said, "Office. I keep work things in there. It's a mess. I'll clean it out one of these days." He said it easily, smiled, poured himself more tea, and that was the end of it, because that was the kind of man Warren Hayes was. He answered your question, looked you in the eye, and moved on so naturally that asking again felt like an accusation. Kathleen had let it go. She was good at letting things go. It was one of the first skills she'd learned after her mother died. How to leave a silence alone, how to not pull every thread that dangled. She had known Warren her entire life, which was the strange part. Or rather, she had known of him, the way you know of weather, or of furniture that's always been in a room. He was simply a part of her father's life, the way certain things are simply a part of a life, permanent, familiar, and somehow never fully examined. George Mitchell and Warren Hayes had been friends for 31 years. Kathleen knew this because her father had mentioned it exactly once, on a Christmas Eve when she was perhaps 12 years old, in the offhand way that men of his generation referenced longevity, not as sentiment, but as fact. "Warren and I have been friends 31 years, he had said, looking out the window at the gray December street. She remembered thinking, that's longer than I've been alive. She remembered thinking he said it not with warmth, exactly, but with something heavier, something like weight. She had not thought of it again until 18 months ago, when her father collapsed on his morning walk along the Battery and was gone before the ambulance arrived. 64 years old, a heart that had never announced any trouble, a body that had simply decided on a Tuesday in March that it was finished. Warren had been the one who called her. She still remembered the way he'd said her name, Kathleen, with a pause before it that was almost imperceptible. The kind of pause a person makes when they are gathering themselves to say something that cannot be unsaid. And then, "It's your father. There's been an accident. I need you to come to Roper Hospital." He had been there when she arrived. Standing outside the emergency entrance in a gray suit jacket, hands in his pockets, face composed in a way that told her everything before the doctor said a word. He had put his hand on her shoulder. He had not said, "I'm sorry." He had said, "He didn't suffer." The doctor said it was very fast. And then he had stood there beside her, quietly, for 4 hours, while she made the calls and signed the papers and answered the questions. And he never once suggested she sit down, or that she cry, or that things would be okay. He just stayed. She had always respected that about him. He was a man who understood that presence mattered more than words, the love. If that was the right word for what had begun slowly, tentatively, in the months after her father's death, was not the kind that announced itself. There was no moment she could point to and say, "There." That was when it changed. It was more like the way light changes in a room when clouds shift outside. Gradual, almost unnoticeable, until you look up and realize everything looks different from how it did an hour ago. He had helped her sort through her father's apartment. That was how it started, practically speaking. George Mitchell had been a meticulous man. Organized files, labeled boxes, nothing left to chance. And yet the apartment had still contained 40 years of accumulated life, and Kathleen had stood in the center of the living room on a Saturday morning, looking at it with the blank incomprehension of someone facing a task they don't know how to begin. Warren had knocked at 10 o'clock, brought coffee, didn't ask what she needed help with, just started going through the bookshelves methodically, asking only keep or donate for each item. That was all. No pity, no ceremony, just the practical business of helping, conducted with the same quiet precision with which he seemed to do everything. They worked until 4 in the afternoon, took a break for lunch at a small place on King Street where they'd both apparently been going for years without ever crossing paths. And somewhere between the soup and the bill, they had a conversation. A real one. The kind that surprises you with its depth. About George Mitchell. About who he had been. About the things that made him difficult. And the things that made him extraordinary. And the particular loneliness of loving a person who kept whole rooms of himself locked away. He was the most private man I've ever known, Warren said. He was looking at his coffee when he said it. I knew him for 31 years, and I'm not sure anyone ever knew him completely. Kathleen had looked at him across the table and felt for the first time since the hospital something that was not grief. Not exactly. Something more complicated than grief. Did you, she asked, know him completely? Warren looked up at her then, and the pause he gave before answering, brief, careful, was exactly the same as the pause he had given before saying her name outside the emergency room. No, he said, but I knew him better than almost anyone. And I'd like to tell you about him, if you'll let me. She had let him. The courtship, she thought of it that way, privately, because it had the feel of something from another era, lasted 8 months. Dinners that became longer. Walks along the Battery that became regular. Conversations that began with her father and gradually, naturally, opened into other things. Her work at the library, the particular pleasure she took in old records and forgotten documents. The way she sometimes felt, surrounded by the paper traces of other people's lives, that the past was more present than the present. His work, consulting, financial structures, the kind of things she understood in outline but not in detail. His years in Richmond before he'd come to Charleston. His late wife, Barbara, who had died of cancer 12 years ago, and whom he spoke of with the straightforward tenderness of a man who has fully grieved and has not let grief become his identity. He was 56 years old to her 31. This was the thing people mentioned when they felt entitled to mention things. Her friend, Nancy Sullivan, who worked alongside her in the archives department and had been married and divorced twice, and considered herself an authority on male behavior, had raised an eyebrow over their lunch table and said, in her direct way, Kathleen Ann Mitchell, I say this because I love you. Be careful. Men his age who fall for women your age are either running from something or looking for something. Figure out which one he is. Kathleen had thought about this seriously, the way she thought about everything seriously. She was not naive about the arithmetic of it. 25 years was a real distance. But when she was with Warren, the distance didn't register the way she expected it to. He didn't speak to her like a father figure or look at her with the particular quality of attention that belonged to possession rather than love. He listened to her, argued with her gently on things they disagreed about, admitted when he was wrong, asked questions about her life that showed he'd actually thought about what she'd said the last time they'd spoken. He's not running from anything, she had finally told Nancy. He's just steady. Nancy had looked at her for a long moment. Steady can be the most dangerous thing of all, she'd said. Steady is how they get you. Kathleen had laughed. And then, in the quiet of her apartment that night, she had not laughed. she had sat with the word steady and turned it over and decided that what she felt was not being gotten. It was being chosen. And that after years of relationships that had felt like being temporarily convenient for someone, felt like something she wanted to keep. They married on a Saturday in October at a small ceremony in the garden of a friend's house on Trad Street. 22 people. Gardenias. A late afternoon that had been overcast all morning, and then, with improbable timing, turned golden just as they exchanged rings. Kathleen wore her grandmother's pearl earrings and a dress she'd found in a small shop on Queen Street. Ivory, simple, nothing bridal about it, except that it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever worn. Warren cried very slightly when she walked toward him across the garden. She saw it, the brightness in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened to hold it. And it was, she thought, the most honest thing she had ever seen on a human face. She had almost stopped walking just to look at him for a moment longer. The dinner afterward was warm and small and ran 3 hours past when it was supposed to end, because the people who loved them were in no hurry to let the evening go. Nancy gave a toast that was funny and unexpected and ended with total sincerity by saying, "I was wrong about you, Warren Hayes. I am delighted to be wrong." Warren raised his glass to her and said, "I'll take that." By the time they were alone in the house on Rutledge Avenue, it was nearly midnight. The house was quiet. The caterers had gone. The last of the guests had filed out 2 hours before, trailing good wishes. The rooms smelled faintly of gardenias and candle wax. Kathleen was standing in the kitchen, still in her dress, shoes off, looking at the remains of a bouquet someone had left on the counter. She took stock of herself honestly, happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. The kind of happy that surprised you because you hadn't realized until that moment how long it had been absent. She decided to get a glass of water before going upstairs. She filled the glass, drank it standing at the sink, looked out the window at the dark garden, and then she heard it. It was a voice, his voice, low, completely controlled, coming from somewhere above her, from the second floor. Her first thought, reflexively, was that he was on the phone. But then she listened more carefully, and something about the cadence was wrong. It wasn't the rhythm of a phone call. There were no pauses for the other person to speak. It was continuous, measured, precise, like someone reading from a prepared text or transmitting something. She set down her glass very carefully. She went to the stairs, climbed them in her bare feet, her hand barely touching the railing. The sound grew clearer as she reached the landing. It was coming from the end of the hallway, from behind the locked door. She stopped 4 feet away from it. In the thin strip of light under the door, she could see a faint pulse. Not quite lamplight, not quite blue. The kind of light that comes from screens. Multiple screens, maybe. She couldn't be sure. She pressed her fingers against the brass of the door handle. It didn't give. She stood there, in her wedding dress, in the dark hallway, listening. Warren's voice, so familiar, so steady, the voice she had chosen, was speaking in a pattern she did not recognize. Not the rhythms of conversation, not the patterns of a phone call, words she could not fully make out, but the structure of which was unmistakably deliberate. Coded. She had worked in archives for 8 years. She knew what a person sounded like when they were reading from a document, and she knew what a person sounded like when they were producing one. Without thinking, she touched the watch on her left wrist, her father's watch. Her fingers found the clasp and pressed it, opened it, closed it, opened it again. She stood there for 40 seconds. She counted them later in the retelling to herself. And then she turned and walked back down the hallway and into their bedroom and lay down on top of the covers, still in her dress, and stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep. She had been lying there for perhaps an hour when she heard him come to bed. He moved quietly. He always moved quietly. And when he lay down beside her and found her still dressed and still awake, he put his hand on hers in the dark and said simply, "I'm sorry I was so long." She said, "It's all right." She said it easily, smoothly, with the same natural composure with which he answered questions he didn't want to answer. She had learned something about herself in that hallway. She could wait. Whatever was behind that door, it had been there for years. It would keep. And she, Kathleen Ann Mitchell Hayes, who catalogued the secrets of the dead for a living, was very, very good at being patient. Before we go any further into Kathleen's story, and I promise you, what's coming will leave you completely breathless, I want to take just a moment to step outside the narrative. If this story is already pulling you in, please subscribe to the channel and tap that notification bell so you never miss a new story. And leave us a comment right now telling us where you're watching from. Your city, your state, your country. We love knowing where our listeners are. We read every single one. Now, I want to be honest with you for a moment. YouTube has been limiting the reach of channels like ours in ways we don't always fully understand. And it makes it harder to keep bringing you stories with this kind of care and quality. If you'd like to support what we do here, there is something truly special waiting for you in the link in the description and in the pinned comment. Something we put together with a lot of love for the people who believe, like we do, that a good story is worth everything. We are so grateful for every single one of you who has stayed with us this far. Now, back to Kathleen, who is about to discover something that will rewrite everything she thought she knew about the two most important men in her life. The next morning, he made eggs and coffee, and they ate breakfast in the kitchen in comfortable silence, the way they always had. And he asked her what she wanted to do with the day. And she said she thought she might go by her father's apartment. There were still some boxes she hadn't gotten through. He said that sounded fine. He said he had some work to catch up on. She nodded, drank her coffee, did not look at the ceiling. At the apartment, she didn't open boxes at first. She sat in her father's reading chair and let herself be still. The apartment had that particular quality of silence that belongs to places where someone lived alone for a long time. A thick, layered quiet that had absorbed decades of a single person's habits and had not yet given them up. Her father's reading lamp. On the small table beside the chair, a coaster, a mechanical pencil, a notepad with his handwriting on the top sheet. A grocery list, apparently, from sometime in February, the month before he died. Milk, bread, coffee, stamps, stamps. She looked at that word for a long time. Her father had not, to her knowledge, been someone who sent much mail. He'd had email. He'd been perfectly competent with technology for his age. The grocery list was not unusual. But that word, stamps, in his handwriting in that particular month, caught at something in her that she couldn't name yet. She set down the notepad. She began, methodically, to go through the apartment. She found the bank statement 3 days later, tucked inside a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird on the second shelf from the bottom, a book her father had owned for decades, but that she'd never seen him reread. The statement was for an account at a bank she didn't recognize. Palmetto Heritage Trust, a small regional institution she looked up and found, had closed in 2004. Its accounts transferred to a larger bank. The statement was from 1997. It showed regular monthly deposits of exactly $480, labeled only with the code HPC7. $480 a month for 12 months of documented history from an institution she didn't recognize under a code that meant nothing to her. She photographed it, put it back in the book, put the book back on the shelf. She was an archivist. She knew better than to move a document before she understood its context. That evening, she asked Warren, carefully and casually, over dinner, not looking up from her plate, whether her father had ever mentioned having a second bank account. A savings account, something like that. Warren was quiet for a moment. She couldn't see his face because she wasn't looking at it, but she could feel the quality of the pause. George was private about his finances, he said. You know how he was. I wouldn't necessarily have known about every account he kept. It was a perfect answer. True, almost certainly. Deflecting without lying. She recognized the architecture of it immediately, the way she recognized certain handwriting styles in old documents, the distinctive pressure of a person who chose their words with care. Right, she said. Of course. And she moved on to another subject, and she felt him relax. Barely, but enough. And she filed everything away in the part of her mind where she kept things she wasn't done with yet. 3 weeks after the wedding, Nancy came to find her in the archives at lunch. I remembered something, Nancy said, settling uninvited into the chair across from Kathleen's desk, with the easy authority of a woman who has never in her life waited to be invited. About your dad? Kathleen looked up from a land deed from 1863. What about him? He came in here, Nancy said, maybe 6, 7 weeks before he died. I was up front. You were out that day, one of the school group tours. He asked about accessing the commercial records from the 90s, the microfilm. Kathleen set down the land deed. He had his library card, Nancy continued, perfectly legitimate. I set him up in the reading room. He was here for 3 hours, maybe more. I brought him a coffee at some point, and he thanked me very nicely and went right back to whatever he was looking at. I didn't think anything of it. She paused. Until now. What made you think of it now? Nancy looked at her steadily. Because I was updating the access logs last week, and I noticed that someone had tried to delete his access record from the digital system. Not the physical logbook, just the digital one. And I thought that was strange. Kathleen was very still. When was the deletion attempted? About 2 weeks after he died. Nancy paused. The attempt didn't work, by the way. The backup server kept the record automatically. I only noticed because there's a flag in the system when someone tries to delete a patron record instead of just archiving it. Kathleen looked at her friend across the desk for a long moment. Nancy, she said carefully, I need to look at what he was viewing. The microfilm records from that day. Already pulled them, Nancy said, and set a folded slip of paper on the desk. The call numbers are right there. I didn't look at them myself. I figured you should be the one. She squeezed Kathleen's hand once, briefly, and went back to her lunch. The microfilm records were commercial registration documents, incorporation filings for a series of shell companies registered in South Carolina between 1989 and 1998. Most of them had names that sounded like real estate investment groups. Most had registered agents whose names meant nothing to her. Most of them. On the 31st frame of the second reel, she knew because her father had flagged it with a tiny paperclip that was still there. She found an incorporation filing for a company called Lowcountry Capital Partners, LC, registered in October of 1992. The 2 founding officers were listed as George Allen Mitchell, Warren James Hayes. Kathleen read it twice, then 3 times. Her father and Warren had been business partners. For at least 6 years in the 1990s, they had co-founded and operated a company together. A company she had never heard of, never been told about, that had apparently ceased to exist without leaving any trace in her memory of her childhood or her father's conversation. Formally dissolved in 1998, as though it had never happened. What had Lowcountry Capital Partners done for 6 years? and why, more than 25 years later, had her father come to this library 6 weeks before his death to photograph its founding documents. She walked back to her desk. She sat down. She opened the clasp of her father's watch and closed it. Opened it. Closed it. She called Warren. "Hey," he said, picking up on the second ring. His voice was warm. "How's your morning?" "Good," she said. "Listen, I have a strange question. Did you and my father ever have a business together? A partnership of some kind? In the 90s? The pause lasted exactly as long as the pause outside the emergency room. Exactly as long as the pause at the restaurant table on King Street. Exactly as long as every other pause she had been cataloging in the archive of her memory for the past 4 weeks. "We had a small investment vehicle for a few years," he said. "Nothing significant. Where did you come across that?" "I found some old papers," she said, and then very carefully, "I'll tell you about it tonight." "Of course," he said. "I'll make dinner." She hung up. She sat at her desk. She looked at the window and the gray October sky beyond it. He had not asked which papers. He had not asked where. A man who truly didn't know what she might have found would have asked at least one of those questions. A man with nothing to hide would have been curious. Warren Hayes was not curious. He was waiting. The question was no longer simply, what was behind the locked door? The question, the one that was making her hands very still on the desk, the one that had been building since the night of her wedding, since the hospital hallway, since a grocery list with the word stamps on it, was something far older and far larger. Who exactly had her father been? And what had Warren Hayes promised him? That required an oak door with a different lock, a company dissolved without a trace, and a marriage to a woman who, without knowing it, had seen something she was never supposed to see. She did not tell him about the microfilm. Not that night, not the next morning, not for the 2 weeks that followed. She cooked dinner and listened to music and went to bed beside him and felt, each day, the quiet normalcy of their life sliding past her like a current she was standing in. Pleasant on the surface, with something cold and fast moving underneath. She had become, without planning to, an investigator. The archivist's instinct had taken over completely. In her work at the library, she never moved until she understood the shape of a thing. She collected before she concluded. She checked what she thought she knew against what the records actually showed. The same discipline now turned itself, with unnerving precision, on the man she had married. She looked up the hotel where he'd claimed to spend the weekend 2 weeks after the funeral. The weekend, someone had attempted to delete her father's library record. The hotel was real. The conference he'd claimed to attend was real. She could not confirm from the outside that he'd been there. She set that aside. She kept moving. Low Country Capital Partners. 6 years, 1992 to 98. She searched every database she could access through the library's subscriptions, litigation records, SEC filings, any public footprint at all. There was almost nothing, which, she knew from years of archival work, was itself a kind of information. Legitimate small businesses left traces. Something that left almost nothing had been deliberately cleaned. She was 3 weeks into her quiet excavation when she found, in a manila envelope inside a toolbox in the laundry room closet of her father's apartment, the last place she would ever have looked, which was probably why it was there, a journal. It was not the kind of journal she expected. No sentiment, no reflection, no record of daily feeling. It was small and blue, the kind of notebook a contractor uses on a job site, and it was filled with her father's handwriting, cramped, precise, economical, in a format she recognized immediately from decades of processing historical records. It was a log. Dates, times, brief descriptive notations. Codes she didn't understand. Locations. sometimes a name, sometimes just initials. The entries ran from September of 1991 to August of 1998, the exact span of Low Country Capital Partners. She sat on the laundry room floor in the apartment's particular silence and read it from the beginning. Most of it she could not decode without a key. The locations were specific enough: docks on the Cooper River, warehouse addresses in North Charleston, a marina off Folly Beach. The names were always in initials, with two exceptions that appeared regularly enough that she suspected they were operational aliases rather than real identities. But the last 6 pages were different. The last 6 pages were written in 2023, 30 years after the journal began. Her father's handwriting slightly looser, slightly older. He had come back to this journal in the final months of his life and added something to it. He had written in plain English, as though he'd finally decided the codes didn't matter anymore, because whatever protection they'd offered was either no longer needed or no longer enough. She read his words slowly, the way she read all documents that had waited a long time to be found. He wrote, "She is going to find this eventually. She finds everything. It's the thing I love most about her and the thing I've been afraid of her whole life." He wrote, "W and I were not just friends. We were not just business partners. For 7 years, we reported to a federal financial crimes task force, voluntarily, without compensation for the first 2 years, and then, with modest support under HPC designation, once the Callaway money started moving through the port. We were accountants and consultants by training. We knew what we were looking at. We saw things the agencies couldn't see without civilian access. We chose to do something about it." He wrote, "No one knows this. Not family, not colleagues, not even Barbara knew everything. The Low Country Capital Partners entity was a cover, a way to explain our meetings, our joint access to certain records, our income that in the early years came from nowhere the tax forms could easily show. HPC 7 was our designation. $480 a month was our nominal expense reimbursement, nothing more. We were not paid. We were not agents. We were what they call cooperative witnesses with extended placement, citizens who stayed in place and kept watching." Kathleen stopped reading. She sat with that for a very long time. Her father, George Allen Mitchell, meticulous and private and quiet as a closed room, had spent 7 years of his life working alongside Warren Hayes as a voluntary informant for a federal task force. The bank deposits she'd found were operational reimbursements. The company that left almost no trace had been deliberately designed to leave almost no trace. And neither of them had ever said a word. She turned the page. The next entry was dated 3 weeks later, December the 2nd. Her father had been dead in March. He had written this 11 weeks before the Tuesday morning when his heart stopped on the Battery Promenade. He wrote, "Kathleen was at the port 2 years ago. She doesn't know. She took photographs of the harbor at sunset. She sent me 3 of them, and I had them printed, and they've been on my refrigerator ever since. Beautiful photographs. She has an eye for the real thing hidden inside the ordinary image." She stopped again. She was thinking about a Tuesday afternoon 2 years ago. Warm for March, unexpectedly warm. She had walked down to the waterfront after a long day at the library and taken photographs of the harbor at golden hour. She had sent 3 of them to her father. He had texted back, "Beautiful. You always find the real thing." She had not known what he meant by the real thing. She had thought he was talking about the light. She kept reading. He wrote, "One of those photographs has a man in the background, getting off a private vessel. She didn't notice him. Why would she? He's just a person in the background of a harbor photograph. But W recognized him when I showed him the photos. recognized him immediately. It's Harlan Calloway's financial director, the man who moved $140 million through shell accounts over 11 years. The man who has spent the past 18 months under sealed federal indictment, whose trial is set for spring. He wrote, his legal team has been aggressive. W believes, and I believe him because he has always understood these things better than I have, that they may have run facial recognition searches on social media backgrounds near the port from that weekend. If they identify Kathleen as connected to me, and me to the task force, her photograph becomes evidence, and she becomes, at minimum, a person of interest to people with nothing to lose. He wrote, W has a plan. He's had one for 6 months. I've told him, I think it's too much. He says it's not enough. We've argued about it more times than I can count, but my heart has been making sounds it didn't used to make on my morning walks, and I am running out of time to come up with a better one. And then, in the last lines of the entry, in handwriting that was slightly uneven, as though written with more effort than the rest, her father had written, if she's reading this, I'm sorry for the shape of it. I was never good at saying things directly. Your mother always said that about me. She was right about most things. W loves you. That part is not the plan. That part came first. It came long before the plan needed to exist. It came from watching him watch you at your college graduation, at your 30th birthday dinner, at every occasion where I could see his face when he thought I wasn't looking. I have known for years. I did not say anything because I did not know what kind of future it could have. I know now, and I've told him, whatever the plan, she has to choose. If she doesn't choose freely, the plan is nothing. She chose. I know she did, because W would have told me if she hadn't, and he has not. Kathleen closed the notebook. She sat on the laundry room floor for a very long time without moving. She was thinking about a Christmas Eve when she was 12 years old, and her father had said, looking out the window at the gray December street, Warren and I have been friends 31 years. And she had thought he said it not with warmth, exactly, but with something heavier. She understood now what the weight was. It was not the weight of a long friendship. It was the weight of a shared secret. The weight of 7 years of choosing to do something difficult and quiet and unrecognized with a person you trusted completely, and then living with that choice in silence for the rest of your life. She stood up. She put the journal under her arm. She drove home. She did not call first. She was halfway up the stairs when she stopped and looked at the hallway and the door at the end of it, and looked at it with completely different eyes. She walked to it. She knocked on it 3 times, the way she'd knock on any door. There was a silence, then the sound of a lock turning. Then the door opened. Warren was standing in a room she had never seen. It was small, smaller than she'd imagined, and it was, in fact, an office in the literal sense. A desk with 2 monitors, equipment she recognized from enough years of government document research as a secure communications unit, filing cabinets, a wall map of Charleston with certain areas marked in erasable marker, and on the desk, in the kind of acid-free document sleeve used for sensitive files, a stack of papers bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice. He looked at her. He looked at the blue notebook in her hand. You found it, he said. The toolbox, she said. I found everything eventually. I always do. He exhaled, not with relief, exactly. More like a man setting down something very heavy after a very long walk. Sit down, he said. I'll make coffee. And then I'll tell you everything. All of it. Whatever you want to know. Everything, she said. Everything, he said. There are no more locked doors. He told her for 4 hours. about Low Country Capital Partners and the task force, and 7 years of reporting on financial transactions that no one else in the position to see them was willing to report. About Harlan Calloway, a real estate developer from Colombia who had spent the 90s and early 2000s moving laundered money through the port with the elegance of someone who understood exactly how little attention civilian accountants receive at maritime customs. About the case being built, slowly, over a decade, and the sealed indictment and the trial now set for April. About the photograph. Your father showed it to me in December, Warren said. He didn't tell me about the heart sounds until February. He was typical George about it. Mentioned it like a footnote. By the way, my heart's been irregular. Probably nothing. I knew immediately it wasn't probably nothing. I knew we were running out of time. The wedding, Kathleen said. The wedding was not... He stopped, started again. I need you to understand the sequence. I told your father about my feelings for you in September of the year before. I'd been sitting on them for a long time, and he could see it, and he finally asked me directly, and I told him directly. His response was... Warren smiled very slightly at the memory. He looked at me for about 30 seconds, and then he said, I know. I've known for 2 years. Do something about it, or stop looking at her like that. Those were his exact words. Kathleen laughed, a short, involuntary laugh that surprised her completely. The plan came 3 months later, Warren continued, when we understood the defense team was running searches. The safest thing for you was to be living under a different name, in a house with different utilities and property records, with a man whose connection to the task force was known and whose proximity to you could be explained as protection of a material witness. Your father insisted the marriage had to be real. Insisted. He said if it was pretense, he wanted no part of it. I told him it was completely real, as far as I was concerned. He said, then let her decide. Tell her nothing. Let her decide on her own. If she chooses you, it's real, and you have my blessing. If she doesn't, we find another way. Kathleen was quiet for a moment. She was looking at her hands. He never told me any of this, she said. He couldn't. If you'd known you were being protected, your behavior might have changed. It was safer, for the case and for you, if you were simply living your life. And the night of the wedding. The trial date was announced that afternoon, Warren said. I had to transmit a status report. It was poor timing. I thought you were asleep. I came down for water. I know. I heard you on the stairs. He looked at her. I should have told you sooner. After that night. I almost did. 12 times. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid, he said. It was the first time, in all the years she'd known him, that she'd heard him say that word about himself. Not of the case. Of you. Of what you'd think of me. Whether you'd be able to separate what's always been, real, from what looked like construction. Agent Diane Hollis came to the house 3 days later. She was exactly as Kathleen had expected from Warren's description. Efficient, dry, not unkind. She sat across the kitchen table with a file folder and said, in the manner of someone who does not waste words, we appreciate your patience. The photograph your father brought to our attention was significant. We've been able to use it to confirm a timeline that was previously disputed. The trial begins in 6 weeks. You will not be called as a witness. You are no longer considered a person of interest to the defense. As of last Friday, you're off their radar. And my father, Kathleen said, was he at risk in those last months? Hollis paused in the specific way of someone choosing precision over comfort. We believe the discovery of the photograph accelerated a timeline that was already concerning to him. Whether it contributed to the cardiac event, we can't say. Kathleen looked at the table. He knew he might be running out of time, she said, and he spent it making sure I was safe. That's accurate, Hollis said. After Hollis left, Kathleen stood at the kitchen window for a long time. Warren stood behind her at a distance that said, "I'm here, and I'll wait." Eventually, she turned around. "I have one question," she said, "and I need you to answer it before I know what comes next." Anything. If there had been no photograph, no task force, no plan, no risk to manage. She looked at him steadily. Would you still have done something about it? About whatever you felt? Or would it have stayed where it was? Warren went to the desk in the corner of the kitchen. She'd never paid particular attention to that desk. It held mail and keys and the ordinary detritus of daily life. And opened the bottom drawer. He took out an envelope. He put it on the table between them. It was sealed, addressed in his handwriting to her maiden name, Kathleen Ann Mitchell. The postmark, she looked, was dated 14 months before they'd had their first real conversation at the restaurant on King Street. Before the plan. Before any of it. "I wrote it a year before your father died," Warren said. "I never sent it. I didn't think it was appropriate for a dozen reasons. But I kept it, because throwing it away felt like giving up something true." She picked up the envelope. She did not open it right away. "What does it say?" "That I'd noticed you at your father's Christmas dinner 2 years before, when you disagreed with someone about something in city history, and you'd made your case with this absolute calm certainty, and then gone immediately back to being quiet. And I thought, I remember thinking exactly this sitting there, that your father had raised somebody remarkable, and that I'd been trying not to think about you ever since, and failing completely." He paused. "It says some other things. You should read it." She held the envelope in both hands. She looked at it the way she looked at documents that had waited a long time to be read. She did not open it that day. She told him she needed some time. Not to decide, she said, but to breathe. He said he understood completely. She went to Nancy's apartment that night and sat on Nancy's couch and told her everything, all of it. From the locked door to Diane Hollis to the sealed envelope she was now carrying in her bag. Nancy listened with unusual silence for a very long time. "So," Nancy said finally, "your father and the man you married were secretly working with the FBI for 7 years. Your father spent the last months of his life making sure you were protected. And the man you married has been writing you letters he never sent since before any of this started." "Yes," Kathleen said. Nancy looked at her for a moment. "How do you feel?" Kathleen thought about this honestly. "Like someone rearranged all the furniture in a room I thought I knew perfectly," she said. "And I can see that it's the same furniture. It's the same room. But I have to relearn where everything is." "And the furniture," Nancy said carefully. "You still want it?" Kathleen looked at the envelope in her bag. "Yes," she said. "I still want it." She read the letter at the library, alone, the next morning, before anyone else arrived. It was 4 pages, in Warren's careful handwriting. It was not a love letter in the conventional sense. No extravagant declarations, no elaborate expressions of feeling. It was more like a portrait. A description of someone he had been paying quiet attention to over time. Her habit of disagreeing without raising her voice, her patience with difficult patrons, the way she always touched her father's watch when she was concentrating. Her tendency to ask the second question no one else thought to ask. The way she'd handled her father's death. Calm and organized and devastating to watch because it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. Someone managing grief the way they managed everything else because they didn't know how to do it any other way. He had wanted, he wrote, very much, to give her something she couldn't manage, something she could simply feel. He had not known how to offer that without it being something other than what it was. The letter ended. I don't expect this to go anywhere. Some things are true without going anywhere. But I'm writing it down because I think there's a kind of honesty in naming a thing, even when you can't do anything with the name. Kathleen read it sitting at her desk in the archive room, surrounded by the stored records of other people's lives. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and held it in both hands. Her father had sat in a reading room 3 hallways from where she now sat and looked at a piece of paper that told him what was happening between 2 people he loved. He had understood it immediately. And then he had done what he always did. He had found the shape of a solution and built it quietly, with the materials available to him, in the time he had left. She thought, he knew Warren had feelings for me. He knew because he was the most observant man in any room, and because he had known Warren Hayes for 31 years. And instead of saying anything, instead of interfering or advising or doing any of the things that fathers do, he had said only, let her decide. Her whole life, she had felt that there was a room inside her father where she was not invited. She understood now that the room had contained, among other things, this: the knowledge that the 2 people he loved most were circling each other in the dark, and his belief, quiet, stubborn, absolute, that they could find each other without his help. He had been right. The trial of Harlan Calloway began in April and ran for 9 weeks. Kathleen followed it distantly, through news reports, the way you follow weather in a city you've just left. The verdict, when it came, was guilty on all 14 counts. Her photograph, taken on a warm March afternoon 2 years before, sent to her father because the light was beautiful, was entered into evidence in the 3rd week. One reporter described it as a chance image that proved decisive. Kathleen's name appeared nowhere in the coverage. She was simply a citizen who had been in the right place with a camera. She thought about that for a while. All the things you witness without knowing you're witnessing them. All the things that are already true about your life before you have the documents to prove them. The locked room was cleaned out over the course of a weekend in June. Warren did it methodically, the equipment collected by courier, the filing cabinets emptied, the wall map taken down to reveal plain white plaster beneath. At the end, the room was empty. Oak floors, a window she hadn't known was there, afternoon light coming through it in long, yellow panels. What do you want to do with it? Warren asked, standing in the doorway. Kathleen looked at the empty room. The light, the proportions of it. Bookshelves, she said. The good kind, built in, floor to ceiling. He smiled. That'll take a while. I'm patient, she said. She kept the journal. She kept the bank statement. She kept the letter and the envelope it came in, and she put them together in an archival document box, acid-free, with a label on the outside. She did not label it with a date or a title. She wrote, in her own handwriting, George Allen Mitchell. What he knew and when. She put it on the shelf beside her father's copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, where the bank statement had been. Then she went downstairs and stood at the kitchen window, looking at the garden in the late September light. She thought, he knew you were watching him. He knew it, and he stayed anyway. He chose this, the standing beside you at the hospital, the coffee at 10 in the morning, the dinners that ran too long, the conversation on King Street where you argued about the Civil War's financial architecture for 40 minutes. And he looked at you like you were the only person in the room. He chose it before there was a plan, before there was a reason, before there was anything it could be called except honest. Your father saw it, named it, and then stepped back and let you find it yourself. Because he always believed you could find anything if you were given enough time and left alone to look. She opened the clasp of her father's watch, held it open for a moment. The gold of it was warm from her skin. She didn't put the watch away. She kept it on her wrist, where it had always been. But something had changed in the quality of the gesture. It was no longer something she reached for in anxiety. It was simply something she wore. A piece of the past that fit comfortably in the present, the way the best things do. She heard Warren come in through the back door. The particular sound of him, keys, the half-second pause he always gave when he crossed the threshold, as though crossing it was still something worth marking. She heard him move through the house. She heard him stop when he reached the kitchen doorway. She didn't turn around yet, just stood at the window in the last of the evening light because she knew what she would find when she did. And she wanted, just for one more moment, to hold the exact shape of this. A woman in a house on Rutledge Avenue in Charleston in October, who had found what she was looking for in the last place she expected, guided there by a man who loved her quietly for 30 years, and another man who had loved her quietly all along. She turned around. He was in the doorway with his jacket still on, looking at her with the exact expression she had seen on their wedding day. That brightness, that barely controlled weight. And she understood, in the clear way she understood things when she finally had all the documents in front of her, that he had been looking at her that way for a very long time. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She crossed the kitchen. She put her arms around him, and she held on. And he held back, with the particular steadiness that was simply who he was. That quality she'd named at the very beginning and never found reason to revise. And they stood there for a while in the kitchen of the house on Rutledge Avenue, while the light finished its work and the room went warm and dim around them. Outside, somewhere on Rutledge, someone was walking home. The lamplight on the sidewalk was golden. The gardenias in the garden were long finished, but in October, the camellias were just beginning. In the quiet of the house, in the last of the light, everything was exactly what it was. And that, she thought, with the completeness of someone who has found what she was looking for, was more than enough. If Kathleen's story stayed with you, if George Mitchell's quiet, stubborn love left something in you, or Warren's patience, or the particular courage it takes to wait and trust, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell us, what was the moment that changed everything for you? Was it the journal, the sealed letter, the locked door finally opening? We read every single one of your responses, and they mean the world to us. And if you'd like to support the channel and bring something beautiful into your own life, the link in the description and the pinned comment is waiting for you. Every bit of support helps us keep telling stories like this one. Until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. Stories like these exist because of people like you, who still believe that love, honesty, and patience are worth the wait.